This is a boring story. It's a boring story about a giraffe. A boring story about a giraffe named, well, the giraffe doesn't actually have a name because he is boring. Now, most giraffes live in the savannah because they're exciting. But our giraffe, he lives in Nebraska, where there is nothing but corn. Because he is
very boring.
Because he is boring. He lives in a boring town in Nebraska called Boringtown, Nebraska. It's actually a box, a Boringtown box, 3 miles beneath the surface of Nebraska, where there is not even corn. Thus, it is very boring.
But normally, being below the surface would be exciting.
Normally, being below the surface would be exciting. But since this is Boringtown, Nebraska, it's actually very quite boring. Because he lives in a Boringtown box, 3 miles beneath the surface of Nebraska, where there is not even corn. Now you see, Boringtown, Nebraska has only 3 residents because it's quite boring. There's our nameless giraffe, who is very boring. There's a turtle, who doesn't have a name either, because he is also boring. And there's a gibbon, which is like a monkey. Oh, well, actually, he's like an ape, because he doesn't have a tail.
Doesn't have tails, a monkey.
And thus, he is boring. Although, actually, the gibbon, whose name is Durango, is actually the most exciting character in this story. Because the gibbon, named Durango, is a firefighter. He's a gibbon, his name is Durango, and he is a firefighter. He is the most exciting character in this story. Because he's a gibbon named Durango that fights fires.
He never gets to fight any fires.
Although, since he lives in Boringtown, Nebraska, in this Boringtown box, 3 miles below the surface of Nebraska, where there is not even corn, there are no fires for him to fight. But he is the most exciting character in this story, because he's a gibbon named Durango, and he is a firefighter. But the other resident of Boringtown Box, Nebraska, is the turtle, who does not have a name because he is boring. But his job, he is a wall painter. He paints the walls of this Boringtown box. He paints them. And since this is a box 3 miles below the surface of Nebraska, there's only 4 walls. So he paints these walls in varying shades of boring.
Because boring is now a color.
Boring is actually a color now. It's
boring, more boring every time.
It's in between the colors of gray and very boring. He just paints the walls, varying shades of boring. And he does it very slowly, because he is a tortoise.
A turtle.
Well, actually, he's a turtle, because tortoises are more exciting than turtles. And he is very boring. So he is not a tortoise, he is a turtle. And our main character of the story, who is by far the least exciting, because he is not a gibbon named Durango, who is a firefighter, or a nameless turtle, who paints walls boring. He is the nameless giraffe, which I'm sure you have forgotten by now, because he's boring.
But he's obviously the main character.
He is obviously the main character of this story.
But
not the most exciting.
Not the most exciting, because he is not a gibbon named Durango, the firefighter. Or that other one I forgot because he's boring. Neighbor Giraffe. And his job is to watch the paint dry. He just follows the turtle around all day. He doesn't have to move much because he's following a turtle who is not only incredibly boring because he lives in the Boringtown box in Boringtown, Nebraska, 3 miles beneath the surface of
where
Nebraska,
there's not even corn.
where there's not even corn. But he's a turtle, so he is very slow. But our nameless main character's job is to watch the boring paint dry. It's a very boring job. He just sits there all day, watching the paint as it dries. And the paint dries as he watches it, and he follows the boring turtle as the paint dries.
How are they not asleep yet?
And I've run out of boring things to talk about, so the moral of the story is, do not live in a Boringtown box in Boringtown, Nebraska, 3 miles below the surface of Nebraska,
Where there's not even
where there's not even corn.
Hey, don't be
Even if this Boringtown box has a gibbon named Durango, the firefighter, as its most exciting resident, because the rest of the town would be very boring. It would offset the excitement of having a neighbor who was a gibbon named Durango, the firefighter, because you would have a turtle and a giraffe with no names as neighbors.
that are constantly painting the walls.
That are constantly painting walls, boring, and watching the paint dry. And it would be very boring.
If I was there, I would splatter paint it for him.
But go.
Okay.
I have nothing to say to that, Kaylee.
That's because I'm exciting and I can make anything exciting.
No, that's actually quite boring. Do you realize splatter painting different shades of boring would look like?
No.
It would look boring.
Oh yeah, well I'll bring in my own colors.
You can't. It's Boringtown, Nebraska, where there's nothing, not even corn. Because it's in a Boringtown box, 3 miles below the surface of Nebraska.
I'll get 'em.
Where there's not even corn.
I'll get red, blue, and yellow.
Kaylee, you are absurd and you are very boring.
You're ruining the story. Well, that was the plan.
Wait, what was the moral of the story again?
Don't live in Boringtown, Nebraska.
Don't live in Boringtown, Nebraska.
Town box 3 miles below the surface of Nebraska, where there's not even corn. Even if their most exciting resident is a gibbon named Durango, who is a firefighter.
Yes, move somewhere else where there's a gibbon named Durango, the firefighter.
The end.
I'm not sure where you would find a gibbon named Durango, the firefighter, but I would assume he could be found somewhere other than Boringtown Box, Nebraska. But maybe not. I don't remember, because I was bored and didn't really think of it. And, yeah, I've run out of boring things to say, and I've run out of time, so, yeah. Don't be boring. The end.